photography.
Okay.
I think it's crypto one.
Alright, cool. So yeah, like the title says, gonna teach you how to read more effectively. Pretty, the topic doesn't need that much discussion or what it actually is about, but just to give a little motivation on why you should read. If you don't know, Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's other partner who doesn't get a lot of press, but is apparently the much more involved in the two in actually making their investment decisions. And this quote by him, how every single person that he knows that he considers wise read all the time. So just a little motivation on actually learning to read effectively. So for today, I'm just going to go through how you can actually find great books to read, how to find out if a book is worth your time once you actually have it, how to read critically, then how to read across the topic, and then how to ensure that you actually remember everything that you read. So, to find great books. This is a unversed pyramid that I stole from Barnum Street. So at the very top, when you want to find a good book, you just pretty much take in everything, and then you actually narrow it down based on where your goals are. And then from there, you really filter and try to get the absolute best books. Because there are a lot of terrible books out there. Probably about 90% of them are not really worth your time, considering how there's, I think, 300 coming out every minute, especially with all the self-publishing there is now. So for actually just getting pure numbers of books into your funnel, recommendations from friends, I mainly get them from like Dan and Jordan, and then I also try to give as many as possible. Online you can find interviews with people who are known to be very large readers, like especially Ryan Holiday, occasionally Bill Gates and Derek Sivers. And then also you'll see people posting lists. I like the Farnham Street ones especially. They just overall are very good at taking and curating very good books to read. In addition, books that you already have, you can go through the bibliographies and the appendices, and just overall the books that the authors would recommend to read after their book. And this is also really a way to find just mass amounts of books. And then favorite authors, you can go to Amazon, and then you can actually go and browse in a real bookstore, which I haven't done in a while, but probably should.
So antique shops?
Antique shops?
Or like, is this still a thing? The downtown Troy bookstop actually has some like really nice recommendations like every once in a while.
Which one?
The one on like the corner of the Wedge. I've seen some like decent books, but
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
it's like right near the old makerspace spot.
Yeah, it's near the river. Where the farmers market.
Yeah, I think I was there last year, but didn't end up going this year, unfortunately. So, yeah, the next thing to narrow down the filter is what are you actually trying to get out of reading in general? So, like, I tried to take a key from Max's presentation before and include comments here, particularly Calvin and Hobbes, since it's particularly apt at pretty much everything. So, Calvin is just kind of asking how he doesn't really care about what he's reading. And there really isn't a point in reading anything that you don't care about. If it doesn't interest you, there's really no point, so just put it out, or put it down. And then finally, if you want to really have a filter on what you read, if you just have like 20 things that you want to read this week, how are you going to actually get that down to just one or two? So if you really trust someone, then you'll just pick up that book and read it immediately from the referral. And then there's also the Lindy effect, which is a term from evolution, where once something has actually lived a long time, it's even more likely to live even longer. And that's especially true with ideas and books. So if you think of something like the Stoic classics, those were from over 2,000 years ago. They are more likely than a book that came out yesterday to be around another 2,000 years from now. So if it's old, in general, it is more worth your time. Then obviously you can go on reviews on Amazon, Goodreads. It's really hard to actually tell nowadays what reviews are worth reading and what aren't, because there's a lot of shilling and there's a lot of counter shilling. So generally, if it's above 4 stars, it like passes the baseline filter. And books are not that expensive. You're probably going to get, over your lifetime from a really good book, probably 10,000 times what you paid for it in terms of return. So, and then how to act, once you have the physical book, how do you actually figure out if it is worth your time? So, what I do, and what I know a lot of other people who do this too, is at first you just do a really quick skim. So if you're in a bookstore, how are you going to figure out what the book is about if it's something that interests you? So you just you look at the table of contents, you look at the front and back, like the little dust jackets of the books, and then you can just go through and randomly skim intro sentences that you find to be particularly interesting. And then obviously, again, reading reviews that are more summaries than actually reviewing the content of the book. And then if you think that it is still worth your time if it has interesting ideas, you go through and you do a superficial read, which is you go through and read the introduction in full, read the conclusion in full, read the subtitles of each chapter, and perhaps the first and last paragraphs of each chapter or even subtitle, and then just kind of flip through and see if this is something, again, that you're interested in, if you think it's something that you want to be reading, if you would know it. There's a couple guiding questions I have here. So what is the book actually trying to argue? Most books are trying to persuade you of something, and you should really try and be cognizant of what exactly the author's biases or conflicts of interest are, and how exactly they might come into play in trying to sway your attention, especially if it's something to do with health and nutrition. I think half the books out there are scientists who have gotten lots and lots of funding from, like, what was the big one? Yeah, like the wheat industry and the potato industry. Just most of those books are just absolute garbage because they just have such conflicts of interest. And then finally, what do you already know in this book? What don't you? You really don't need to read the entire book. Like, how many times have you read a book and it's just, they're talking about the Willpower Marshmallow Challenge? There's like 50 books that mention that somewhere, and it's just not worth reading again and again and again. Just skip it. And if you really need a refresher, you can skim it, but again, you shouldn't really need more than that if you've seen it before. And you really want to try and just maximize how much you can get out of this book for the time you put into it. Again, like 80-20. You want to read the sections that you really want to. You want to read them for understanding and for and to actually think critically about them. So another comic on this. So this is a good example of what you don't want to do when you read. Obviously, it's a bit exaggerated, just kind of like flipping through the pages as if you were able to have a photographic memory. So you want to actually be able to understand the book, like Susie is doing in this one, where she's going back and seeing things that she took notes from, didn't understand, and is really trying to grasp the concepts that are presented. Obviously, just to bring it back to the last section, if it's not interesting, it probably is worth doing this, but if it's something you want to understand, you should probably try and do it at the level that's shown here. So there's not really a set system that's going to work for everyone, but there are a couple guidelines. Just every time you see something, every time you're reading anything, you just want to question it, especially if the writing's really good. People like Michael Lewis, Malcolm Gladwell, Charles Duhigg, the stuff they write is great, and it's told by a lot of stories, but there's a lot of stuff that if you dig deep into it, it's real easy to be seduced by the writing that is hiding suicides behind it. So again, you want to identify if they're biased in some way, if they're connected to anything, and especially if they're drawing the wrong conclusions from the evidence that they have. And then just another way to be engaged is to underline any passages that you think you're going to want to remember later, any passages you find is particularly interesting, and then write your questions, connections to other books, and whatever ideas or possible foreshadows that you think there are. And then an even better way to just remember absolutely everything you read is after each chapter, you go through and do the Feynman technique, which for those who don't know was popularized by Richard Feynman. And this is where you, without looking back at the book, you write down the very main ideas of the chapter and then the main arguments for it. in the simplest way possible, as if you were going to teach it to someone else that is like half your age. And then if you can't do that, you really don't understand it. And you should probably go back and not necessarily read it again, but at least try and fill in those blanks. An especially good way to do this is to use metaphors and analogies. Just if you're explaining to someone who's 5 years old, you're going to want to connect it to something else that they already do understand. And you want to decide if you agree or if you don't agree with the author. Again, lots of biases. There might be something missing. There might be evidence that isn't necessarily supporting conclusions. So, again, just be critical. People see books and they just kind of like take it as truth. And like I said before, there's a lot of bad books out there, and you really want to kind of protect your mind against horrible ideas. And that sounds closed off, especially now with like the whole PC movement, in that you don't want to be exposed to ideas that hurt you, but there really are a lot of stupid things that you can read, and if you don't take them, if you take them without thinking about them, they really can hurt you. So just think. Yeah, and then after this, it's generally a good idea to put the book down for a week or two. If you take the notes from the book right after you read it, you're just gonna exactly write out the notes that you had before, and you don't really have time to take in those ideas and try to apply them to your life and try to see where the connections are to other ideas. You just want to kind of let your subconscious work for you instead of just having it be a conscious process. I find that especially this gets a lot of new ideas out there from reading particularly dense books. And so when you do pick it up, you want to ask if you do see the book in the same way, if you see any new connections to other ideas, how much do you actually remember the book, and how simply, again, can you explain it? If you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it. So there are a lot of options.